Hi, everyone. On the 7th of April of 1936, the first major novel of Ayn Rand, We the Living, was published. This is a novel that she characterized as something that would be as close as something would get to her biographical experience from her years in the post-revolutionary Soviet Union. And the book is the struggle of the heroine Kira in an environment that is not hospitable to her values and to her aims, to her purpose in life, and how she deals with the situation, how she deals with the people around her, how she deals with people who are friendly to the regime, but also with people who try to resist and try to keep living when life out there seems to be almost unbearable. So this is a special episode. We have two guests. We have John Hersey. John is a fellow and an instructor at the Objective Standard Institute. John, thanks for being with us. And we have Susanna Milgram. You've probably seen Susanna in one of our many videos in the Atlas Shrugged series, but also you might have seen her, if you're a member, in our Friday reading groups, which is for members only, and it's a reading of We the Living. Susanna is teaching English literature at Virginia Tech University. Susanna, thanks very much for being with us. So let me begin with the first. Let me throw the first thing on the table. So, how do you view the We the Living? Do you view it as a struggle between, let's say, the individual and the collective? Do you see it as the struggle of someone to survive and try to live in different circumstances? So what does the book mean to you? And the reason I'm asking is, I know many objectivists who've said, this is a book that I cannot read. I recognize it's good, but it's so difficult for me to experience this struggle of trying to live and survive in a dictatorship, that it's something that I have trouble to read. Now, personally, I didn't experience that. And actually, I read this book for the first time many years ago, but for the second time, I listened to it during the beginning of the lockdown last year, actually at the darkest days of the lockdown. So I got something out of it. So, John, what's your experience with the book, and what do you take out of this book? Why is this book of value to you?
Well, I can certainly understand why many people find it too painful to read. It is a very painful read, but it's also a great warning and a reminder of what things could come to if we allow ourselves to accept certain ideas and follow a certain path. It's a statement of the trajectory, so to speak, of a culture that accepts the idea, as you intimated, of collectivism. It's also just a beautiful story, one of the most beautiful that I've read, one of the most beautiful love stories that I've read. And there is this incredibly intricate, complex plot that it's so easy to just get wrapped up in that plot too. So it's both a sort of political, social, cultural reminder, and this beautiful story about the individual and that individual pursuit of values and what life means. I think to put it into a sentence, what the book means to me is it's a statement of the sacred in human life and what no collective or group should ever have the power to touch or control. So, in a nutshell, that's what it means to me, Nikos.
Thank you. Thanks. And before we go to Susanna, just give a very, very quick overview of some parts of the plot that are not going to involve any spoilers. So, Kira and her family, she comes from a relatively wealthy family from St. Petersburg. Now, during the Civil War years, so the Civil War was after the revolution, when the Bolsheviks came to power, they had to leave and go somewhere else to take refuge, so to speak, from the war. And now they return to St. Petersburg, which is now officially and properly under the rule of the Bolsheviks. So the whites have lost the Civil War, the Bolsheviks have won the Civil War, and now they return to what used to be their city, but it's not anymore. So their business is not anymore there. Even their house, I think, is not anymore there. They have to live in different circumstances. They meet their friends and their family from the old ages. Each one of these people deal in a different way in the new circumstance. Some people have denial. Some people have irrational hope. So there's this argument who says, I'm telling you, the West is going to intervene anytime now. The regime is not going to stand for long. And actually, if you see in historical perspective that the regime lasted from 1917 to 1991, you realize the tragedy of these hopes. And during that time, again, Kira is trying to live a life. She joins the university. She wants to study engineering. And she meets a handsome, beautiful, appealing, but also rebellious guy with whom she falls in love. But also there's another interesting man in her life, someone who's an idealist, a very disciplined and austere communist, who also somehow has a good chemistry with Kira. And this is part of where the plot becomes a bit more complicated, and we're going to discuss it in a while. So this is, again, the overall frame for those of you who haven't read the book or who have read it some time ago. So, Susanna, what is this book for you? What is the main thing you got out of this book? And is it one of the books that you have enjoyed not only reading, but do you go back and reread it?
Okay. Well, first of all, it is a book that I've gone back and reread, and it's also a book that I've taught at the university. And for me, it's Ayn Rand's first novel. As she says, Kira, the heroine, her ideals and her values are those of Ayn Rand. And yet the story, the events are very different. The love story that you outlined for us is in important respects not like Ayn Rand's own story. She went to the university to study history, not engineering, and the outcome for Ayn Rand was different. But nonetheless, when you read this novel, you get very close to the character of Kira, and I find that to be very powerful because that all by itself sets out for you the contrast between the individual and the state. And that's why it is a novel about Soviet Russia, but it's a novel about Kira in Soviet Russia. At one point, someone says, "What are you doing in Soviet Russia?" And of course, that's true. In her soul, she is the opposite of what she sees around her. And well, that's a situation that maybe is not unique to being Kira in Soviet Russia. That's a situation that other people can find themselves in other times. And it's very powerful to see, what is she able to do about it? What does it mean to be in a place, in a time, in a culture that's inimical to you, that doesn't express your values? What can you do about that? Does the culture win? Do you win? How do you fight? What can you preserve? There's a line that Kira says to herself and thinks to herself near the beginning of the novel as she's returning to Petersburg, Petrograd, after having been in the Crimea for a few years. She thinks about, so much is possible, so much is possible. Now that, of course, it's from Nietzsche, which I guess could mean either that Kira thinks like Nietzsche, or that Kira, in that respect, or that she's been reading Nietzsche. And it's a line that shows up later during the novel, because that's the real question. Here I am with my soul and my values. What is possible for me? And that struggle, she doesn't give up. Kira doesn't give up, and which is not the same, which means that she can preserve a kind of spiritual sanctity, whatever her existential circumstances in the Soviet Union. So for me, that's very powerful. It's all about Kira. Now, there are scenes where we have people other than Kira, but almost entirely we're in the world of Kira. We're in the consciousness of Kira. And that by itself is something worth reading a novel for. I mean, Anthem's a very short novel, and we are in the consciousness of that character. When you read The Fountainhead, which again, wonderful novel, but Rourke is there. The last part is named after him, but we spend quite a bit of that novel in the company of other people who were foils for Rourke. And in the large universe of Atlas Shrugged, of course, we're in the minds of many people, including Daphne Tankard, the heroine. But here, you read Kira, and she is in the Soviet Union, but she's also in her own world where so much is possible, and we get to spend our time there with her. And if you think of her as being like Ayn Rand, that's an extra joy in that experience. You know, what is it like to get into the consciousness of someone with something like the soul of Ayn Rand? So I guess when I read it, and I have reread it, sometimes I even in the course of a single reading will reread the parts that have to do with Kira, because it's so important to her not to give up. She says, you know, you're a good soldier, Kira. You know, not to give up on what's important to her, until, of course, she's forced to give up her university studies because she is purged. She doesn't have a choice about that, you know. But any time that she does have a choice about retaining her values, fighting for her values, fighting against anybody and everybody for her values, she will do that. Now, when you're kicked out of the university, what are you going to do about that? You know, you can't exactly, you know, sneak in and get the education that you're not allowed to get. And it doesn't look as if, it looks as if that's a value that has to be postponed, but she would hope not forever. But anytime she has the opportunity to fight for what she wants, she's going to do it. And I think that's very much worth saying. It's very much worth experiencing, because even though we don't live in Soviet Russia, and you know, there is no Soviet Union anymore, there are cultures, there are states, there are places that are hostile to my values, your values, moral values. And in Kira, one can see some of what it would be like to say, well, I'm not giving up. You don't win.
And particularly, Susanna, when we live in a culture of excuses, when many people are saying, oh, it's the government, otherwise I would have thrived, or it's the lockdown, that's why my workout routine is not going well. So from the shortest thing to the biggest thing, we try to find excuses. And that's what I find very interesting, that Kira never tries to find an excuse. The fact that she's a woman in the 20s who wants to study engineer doesn't cross her mind. The fact that everything is against her, the fact that she quite often has to give up her portion of a porridge or whatever they're eating, or she doesn't even think of food because she's so focused in what she's doing. So I think this is a good lesson for all of us, that actually, no, you have to do your best irrespective of what is the situation, what's the situation around you. So, okay, so how about now we talk about the three main characters of the book, which is Kira, Andrei, and Leo. And we try to see what is the relationship between them. So, Susanna, you said some things about Kira. I want to focus now a bit about Leo. And there's going to be some light spoilers, so people, you know, maybe now is a good time to beware to pause if you haven't read the book, or go read it and come back after. It's not such a large book. So how many pages? It's less than 400, and it's 450 pages. Not that bad, at least in the edition that is prevalent in the UK. So in one of the most beautiful romantic scenes, I think, in all of Rand's book, Kira meets Leo, and they fall in love almost immediately. And that is where you understand this idea of falling in love as visibility. So Kira sees the best in Leo, and Leo in a way had forgotten himself. So Leo is the son of someone from, let's say, an aristocratic background, someone who is not popular with the regime. So Leo is not popular with the regime. So he's in a constant situation of either trying to flee or giving up. So he's initially, when we meet him, he's in the lookout of cheap pleasures to forget himself. And Kira reminds him, no, that you have values and life can be good. But then as the book goes on, and as Leo realizes, and they get together with Kira and all that stuff, but as he realizes that, you know what, there is no escape, and this thing is really pressuring, he starts giving up and he starts falling apart, up to a point where he becomes an unpleasant character, I would say. So, John, do you cut any slack to Leo? So do you say, okay, he was broken? Or do you think that he's committing a continuous betrayal against himself, but also against Kira, who is doing a lot about him? And we can say bits in a while what she's doing about him. But she's, to use the conventional term, quote, sacrificing things. Of course, we wouldn't say sacrifice, we would say she's doing things, but the average reader would say, the reader who is not initiating objective would say, she has done all these things for you, and you just gave up. You just are falling apart. You drink, you do stupid things. So, John, do you cut slack to Leo, or do you think that, well, that breaking of his character is inevitable?
Well, at a visceral level, many of Leo's actions are very, very grating, and I do get irritated with his character to an extent. But I think it's instructive to look at Rand's view of Leo and what she intended to portray with Leo's character. Leo, like you said, was the son of an aristocrat. He was the son of an anti-communist admiral in the Baltic Fleet, I believe. And he looked around and saw what life was in Soviet Russia. Rand said that he was too strong to compromise, but too weak to withstand the pressure. And, what you get in Leo is a principled person looking out of the world and seeing this isn't a place where one can actually live and pursue one's values in one's life. And so it's easy, I think, for me to get up on a high horse and say, well, yeah, he should have done more. I haven't lived in Soviet Russia, but the world that Rand portrays in We the Living makes it very, very clear that there are only so many options that one has. You can risk your life trying to escape. You can try to erase your mind, in essence, and try to get rid of that which thinks, because you can't you can't be a valuer and pursue a life that you really want and love. And so if that's not open to you, what do? You have these two forces in conflict, your values and reality. Well, you have to get rid of one of them. You have to get rid of your values, or you have to drown reality, or both. And so Leo, in my eyes, is a very sympathetic character, because he doesn't have a choice, at least in his eyes. He doesn't see fleeing. He doesn't think that there's any means of getting out. So with what little life he has left, well, he's going to do what he can to have the sort of momentary pleasures that we might consider animalistic or just below somebody of his stature. But that's what's open to him. That's all he has.
And to give a bit more context, Leo tries actually to escape, but he fails. And again, his father is Admiral Kovalevsky, one of the main enemies of the regime, and I think he's executed in front of Leo's eyes. So Leo has seen everything. So there's all this background, and in a way, this damage that he's doing to himself, maybe we could say he's trying to kill what is good in him, so that he doesn't suffer when he sees what has happened to the world and what has happened to his country and what was happening to Soviet Union. So, Susanna, what's your take on Leo?
Well, to begin with, I think it's a reasonable question to ask what we think of Leo, because we have two male characters, and Andrei and Leo are very much in contrast. They're in contrast not simply because of their political backgrounds, but they're in contrast in style of soul. Andrei has the ability to carry out a plan, to be sustained, to stick to things. Part of what we see with Leo, and I'm glad you mentioned that he tried to escape, but that wore him out. Okay. If Andrei had the idea of trying to escape, he'd either escape or he'd die, but he wouldn't just quit trying. He'd find another plan. He'd go back next week. Andrei doesn't, well, if Andrei knows what he wants, he continues to do that. And that, I think, is an admirable quality in him. Although, of course, he's on the Soviet side and he's got blood on his hands. Now, Leo has values that would fit him for a happy world. He has enjoyment in life. He has flair. He has style. He has wit, he has swagger, and all of these are, positive qualities, but what he doesn't have is the ability to sustain those in the face of what he sees around him. Now, what's interesting, of course, is how is he different from Kira? Well, for one thing, Kira has something of the good side of Andrei in her, in that she can stick to things. And she also has the ability to enjoy life as Leo does, but she also has the ability to look at Leo and to see in him the hero that he ought to be. And that's an extra value that sustains her. And it isn't that she needs him for her self-esteem, but that she needs him to admire. Now, for Leo, when he meets Kira, she does stop him from descending to the depths, but she doesn't inspire him in the way that he inspires her. So in a way, Leo doesn't have Kira in the way that Kira has Leo, which is one of the reasons, I think, why he doesn't act for her in the way that she does whatever she can to save him. What we see with Leo is that for him, because he's still confronted by the enormous discrepancy between what he wants to have in life and what he believes is possible. And that's not just in his functioning outside, but in his looking at it himself. He sees his own weaknesses, and Kira makes them super evident to him. And so there's an element of pain in that relationship with him, which is why he tells her, that he wishes he hadn't met her and that she's going to stop him from going down, and he doesn't want that to happen. So, Leo doesn't have the same qualities in himself, and he doesn't have the same ability to get from Kira what Kira can get from Leo. But, if he were in a different world, the things that he can't do wouldn't be as destructive to him as they are. And it is true that you talk about Kira, you talk about people making excuses. I wouldn't say that Leo is exactly making excuses, because the opposition he's confronting is real. And that the threat of death, the loss of his father, being expelled from the university, being unable to get a proper job, not being able to fulfill his ambitions, and he gets sick. Well, sick. You can't argue with sickness. That's a real thing. And you can't heal yourself.
The sickness of Leo is a very important part in the novel. So here comes another slight spoiler. So actually, before we talk about this, shall I introduce Andrei, and then we talk about the triangle and the big conflict there. So Andrei Taganov is the third major character. So he's someone who comes from a very poor background, and he's a hero of the revolution. So he's one of the best soldiers that the Red Army has. And as opposed to other communist enthusiasts who basically are, how to put it, they stand on they stand on the sides, and they're like kids from the city who don't really have the experiences that Andrei has. Andrei even has a scar on his face that talks about the battles he has. So he's very, very committed to the struggle. He takes it very seriously. He will kill and he will die for the cause. But also we see something in him which is recognizing the importance of values in other people. So one of the most beautiful scenes for me is that scene where there has been this lethal battle, and there's this white general or something, this notorious white general, and the army of Andrei fights the army of the whites. And under the fog of war, Andrei sees someone there who is injured. They probably were unconscious after the battle, and then they both kind of wake up, and they realize that the one is a red, the other is a white. And they don't know who won. And down at towards the horizon, they see a flag, but it's not clear which flag is it. So they help each other, and they walk together towards there and say, look, If it's my people, if it's your people, one of us will die, or one of us will be captured, not die. So as they go closer to the flag, they realize it's a red flag. And at the same time, Andrei realizes that this guy he's working with is actually the notorious white general or something. And the white general says, can you do me a favor? Or if you have respect for my honor or whatever, can you let me kill myself or something like that? And Andrei does that because he doesn't want him to fall in the hands of, because he knows that it's not going to end well. So we see someone who is at the same time super committed to the cause, but also there's this element in him, which is, there's something good in Andrei. And we realize it by the fact that he likes Kira without any doubt that Kira hates communism, hates his cause. So there's this very interesting back and forth between Andrei and Kira, which is very open. Kira doesn't try to play, or doesn't try to appease him, and he's very open also with her. And also it's clear that he's falling in love with her. And I will claim, and you two can tell me if I'm right or wrong, for me, there's no doubt that Kira is attracted to him. At some level, yes, she's in love with Leo, but the way I see it, she's attracted to Andrei as well. So we see, for example, where she says she liked the scar. She didn't like the battles that the scar comes from, but she likes the fact that that man went through this battle or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. So there are things in Andrei that you sense there's some tension there. And this tension is going to soon lead to one of the biggest, let's say, conflicts of the book. Before we get to the conflict, though, John, are you as sympathetic to Andrei as I am? Because there's also the biographical element that, I was also a Marxist, and, I would like to think myself that I was Andrei. Or do you think, no, there is no excuse, he has blood in his hands? And actually, to make it even worse, he was a GPU officer. He was an officer of the secret police. So his job was literally to hunt down the good guys and merciless exterminate any opposition to the Bolshevik regime. So how do we view Andrei?
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear more about your background and how you personally relate to Andrei. Andrei is very purposefully a sympathetic character. So Rand took a traditional sort of love triangle story involving three characters, a woman and two men. And, a traditional telling of this story, and Shoshana could speak to this better than I could, is the female having to be the mistress of the man that she hates. Andrei he stands for the opposite of her ideals, yet he is extremely honorable in certain respects. He, like you said, this scene with Captain Karsavin, and there's this understanding between these two soldiers. And there's another beautiful scene in which Andrei realizes that Kira is starving, and he is furious, and he's scared. Kira says she had never seen him scared before, and they're at a restaurant. He orders everything on the menu for her to eat and helps her. And you see him, as you pointed out, he's committed to his ideals. He's one of these very determined people. He's not like the spineless creatures that make up most of the communist regime. And you see that, and this is true to historical fact, you see that the people like him, even under the communist regime, could not survive long. That these principled, committed people, that even if their ideals were evil, the fact that they were consistent and held those ideals and didn't let them go, didn't compromise, that painted a target on their backs. And so Rand has given us this very sympathetic character in Andrei, very purposefully. And this is part of what we'll talk about, her being a romantic realist. I mean, she was trying to give us this incredibly difficult conflict, this conflict of interests between characters. And she succeeded incredibly. And one more thing I'd say about Andrei is he is a fictionalized proof of the fact that Rand did not just create cardboard characters like many people seem to think. Many people who have not read the novels, they've read this or that review, and they think, well, Rand's characters, they're just cardboard cutouts for this or that philosophic position. Andrei is proof, and she does what her hero Victor Hugo did. She gives you a sympathetic portrayal of the people that ultimately end up being the villains. So, Andrei, I definitely can sympathize with to a certain extent. His ideals were evil, but Kira says in one scene, if our souls met in some sort of ether, we'd tear each other down to the root. But then when we looked at each other at the root, we'd see that we're both the same. And this is definitely true. There's something about them that is the same.
And you mentioned that what would be Andrei's fate, which actually was his fate. Again, how Rand could see forward. So the book is published in 1936. I'm sure she finished it way earlier. So it became clear to the world what is the fate of the Andreis of this world around 1935 and 1938 with the so-called Moscow trials. So political terrorism within the regime was already a thing, obviously, from the 1920s. But it's in that period that the main heroes of the revolution, one after the other, would put on the show trials, had to humiliate themselves with threats to their family, have to admit that they were allies of fascists, crazy, completely unbelievable stuff, and end up with a bullet in their head, or the luckiest or maybe unluckiest of them to Gulag. But Rand already saw that even the committed idealist like Andrei has no place soon there's going to be no place for him in Soviet Union. And again, the idealist, I don't mean it in a way to whitewash him, but as someone who takes ideas and values seriously, as opposed to the Pavel Sierov or the other, as you said, spineless, disgusting characters who did not fight the big battles. So there is no scar in Pavel Sierov's way, but now suddenly he's the big guy and he's the big shot. Okay, Susanna, before we go to the triangle situation, what's your evaluation and how did you react to Andrei when you were reading With the Living?
Okay, well, Ayn Rand worked overtime to bring out admirable qualities in Andrei, which is part of her strategy in the novel, that you can't simply read characters' vices and virtues from the colors of the hats that they wear. And as you say, there are people on the aristocrat side or the pleasure-loving side who are of different types, and there are certainly people of the communists who are different in their basic natures. Now, many interesting things about Andrei, but one of them is that if Leo is in the wrong place at the wrong time because he doesn't know how to live here, Andrei thinks that he's in the right place at the right time and he would rather live now than any other time. But in truth, that's not the case, because he is an idealist, and he saw these ideals and made a leap to the wrong place, assuming that, okay, that's what morality looks like, because he did not understand initially, comes to understand during the novel, that the individual and what it means for the individual to have values and to count, that was the ideal. That did not occur to him because, I guess, presumably he looked around, and all people that he knew who appeared to be dedicated to their own self-interest, it wasn't their rational self-interest, and it wasn't heroic, it wasn't principled. And so he didn't know what that looked like. He made a leap, and the leap was in the direction of, well, what can I do that's harder? Because that has to, I can do this. I can control myself. I can be consistent. And that means this cause. Now, as the book goes along, and presumably he could have noticed this earlier, that other people who are on his side are not of his nature. And he does see in the Captain Karsavin scene that there's someone who was like him who was on the other side. And he meets Kira, and she is someone who was like him who was on the other side. So it's even, he's relatively young. Some people in their 20s do figure things out. we even see that he's committed to figuring things out. That's part of a plot point that he wants to know. And so he does a kind of experiment. So I think that that's a very admirable quality in Andrei that, well, maybe it's too late. Maybe it's too little, but he does become committed to understanding and to knowing, and it's going to make a difference for him. So I think that that's the key thing about Andrei, is that he does have some capacity to see and correct his own errors. And I guess the question of how seriously you want to take those errors, because they have serious existential consequences. But you see, he doesn't shut down his mind. He doesn't shut down his mind. And I think all three characters, Kira and Leo and Andrei, they observe, they draw conclusions, they think. And actually, we haven't even mentioned Irina, who is a secondary character, but she's a winner too. I mean, she's a person of strong values and very, very brave, committed, principled, positive character, who even gets the big speech about the sanctity of life, which Ayn Rand says was the center of the novel. It's in the mouth of Irina there. I think that's not an accident that she's the one of Kira's relatives.
Is Irina the one who separates with her lover in the train?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's, by the way, that's the most heartbreaking scene in all of Ayn Rand's novel. That's the one scene that it's very difficult to it's tragic. But so let's go now to the big conflicts. We're not going to reveal the end. So the end is going to be, so I want to bring two things, the last two things I want to discuss. The one is the big conflict. So what happens is that, as you mentioned, Susanna, Leo he has health problems. And the way to sort out these health problems is he has to go to a better climate. Now, because of the system, you have to get a political favor to do that. And of course, as someone tells here, look, when thousands of workers died in the Civil War, we're not going to care about one aristocrat. So what he has to do then is he has to go to, by the way, that's a spoiler, so now is another time to pause if you haven't read the novel. So he has to go to Andrei, pretend that she's in love with him in order to save Leo. So she has to live with Andrei for some time, actually, or to act as his lover to save Leo. And indeed, Leo goes for to the sanitarium, how these things were called. He comes back probably even worse person, because it's clear that he doesn't care anymore about his health or anything else. And this is the triangle. This is a triangle that Kira has to pretend that she loves Andrei, pretend in a question mark, because could it be that there is actually something there? And she does this to save Leo. And this is what many people would call, she prostitutes herself in a way. So how do we evaluate this? Is this a kind of prostitution? And is this something that within the context it's admirable or it's commendable, not admirable? John.
Well, when Leo gets sick, Kira exhausts all options. We see her go to the ends of the earth to try to figure out how to save the man that she loves. And again, she is turned down. She goes to various officials. She goes to a commissar. And like you said, what is the worth of one aristocratic life? We don't care about that. So she's turned down. She finally grasps that she has no other option. If she's going to save the man that she loves, unfortunately, she has to cheat on him and become the mistress of a man she does not love, but a man who has plenty of money and who is ready and willing to spend it on Kira, even though they have antithetical ideals, because, like I said, deep down in their souls, they had something in common. He did love her. And as he fell more and more in love with her, he began to love himself and to see that love for himself was not compatible with his own political ideals. And so this what Kira does, and we don't want to give too much away, but there's a beautiful speech toward the end of the book that I'll refer people to that I think explains her moral stature in this case. And, in my evaluation, she was true to her values, even in taking actions that many of us would think are cheating on those values.
Susanna.
Okay, well, it's a complicated situation here because she has to save him without his help. Okay, now if he's actually going to die, I think that, and if he were ready and strong enough to help, then this would be a good time to try to escape again. I'm just saying, okay, so if you try to escape and they'll kill you, well, he's going to die anyway if he doesn't get help. And so the stakes are such that just sitting around, no. But the problem is that at this point, she's got to save him without his help. And she even has to lie to him, not just about where the money's coming from, uncle, aunt, whatever, but the lie has to keep going. So I think that that's a problem, which is not just about the Soviet Union, although you could say that Leo's in the shape he's in because of the Soviet Union. Okay, that's one point. That's one reason why she doesn't have that one other possibility that that could have worked. And it's also true that she's not. It's hard to know what to do in the Soviet Union. Vava, who is Victor's former girlfriend, and her father is a doctor, and a doctor who's not necessarily the most conventional. I thought that maybe that would be one more thing to try. That just saying. However, given that she's done everything that she's thought to do, and she doesn't actually think of entering into a relationship with Andrei for the purpose of getting the money. She hasn't seen him for some time. She liked him as a friend. Now, I know you think that there's an attraction, but I think friends are thin on the ground in Soviet Russia at this time. And he was a fellow student. She certainly liked him as a friend, whatever else. And he could help. Now, what happens when she arrives is she finds out why he's been avoiding her. And it's not as if she had a plot to take advantage of that. There's a kind of foreshortening. Oh, okay. This is how he feels, which she seems not to have known. Although, maybe there's at some level in which she did know. She knew that they understood each other, that they had souls in common, but she didn't come there in order to think, well, I am going to take advantage of this man's attraction for me. No, she came there, as a friend, and he has the view that being friends and being lovers are incompatible. That he says, you looked at me as a friend, and it would be not right for me to approach you. He doesn't even know about Leo, but so he's been resisting the idea of approaching her as one would in a free country. A man who's attracted to a woman, they've been to the opera, they've been to the theater, that could go to the next level, but he didn't think of doing that because he's got a certain view of her and of what she would want. And so when she tells him that she does love him, which again, it happens suddenly, all of a sudden this horrible, wonderful possibility opens up for her, and she jumps. Okay, which is not necessarily what Kira always does, just being impulsive. And what's happening here is certainly not what Andrei typically does. He's been resisting this for months. So that's how it starts. It says she can't work with Leo. This possibility opens up with Andrei. And you mentioned, it's a cliche, the expression falling in love. I think within the novel, it's in real life too, it's rising in love, that people who are in love, bring out the best things in each other. And I think that's true, that she's brought out good things in Andrei, and her love for Leo's brought out good things in Kira. So I think that's also another reason why I think, talking about prostitution is not right, is that Andrei doesn't know.
That's very important,
saying,
to understand. Yeah, to understand the predicament of Kira. Andrei doesn't know who he helps. Leo doesn't know who helps him. And but at the same time, Andrei and Leo, they know each other from a different context, from the context that they're enemies. That Andrei has been after Leo, and Leo knows that this is GPU guy. So Kira has to keep these balances, and at the same time try to pursue her values, and at the same time try not to starve, and at the same time make sure that, you know, the family, everyone is okay. So imagine the burden on the shoulders of Kira while doing all that. I mean, here's a character that could fit an ancient Greek tragedy, but she wouldn't see it as tragedy. For Kira, all this is a pursuit towards her values. And by the way, it's this conflict that slowly, or actually accelerates, Andrei realizing some things, and it leads to the let's say to the climax of the fate of Andrei, which we're not going to reveal. Now, what happens then in the book is mostly the finale, where Kira realizes that she has to leave. This is the part we said we leave outside because it's the peak of the book, and we don't want to completely spoil the plot. But I have one last question to both of you as we are reaching the end. We the Living is the title. So what does the title indicate? Why this title? Why did she choose this title? Am I right that the original title was
Airtight?
Airtight, yeah. Which again indicates, in a way, airtight indicates more like death, or the prospect of death, if I understand it well. We the Living is more like life. So, John, what about? Have you ever thought about the title? And because, in my opinion, it's the most beautiful title from Rand's novel. I like it even more than Atlas Shrugged in terms of the message it conveys.
I agree. It's a very, very fitting title, much better than Airtight, but in a sense, it does have a similar meaning. The living, what happens to the living in a system of Soviet communism, or as Rand said, under any form of collectivism? So this is not a novel about Soviet Russia in the 1920s. It's about collectivism in any form, anywhere, whether it's Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, or what this book might do something to prevent a socialist America. What happens to those people? And this is where I think we could mention the book's relevance to today. We the Living today, look around in the world. Now, we're nowhere close to Soviet Russia, and we don't want to intimate that we are in any way. But if you look at the current state of the world, not just with lockdowns, with all sorts of mandatory business closings, but you see the state's power of the individual has increased dramatically over the past year. And, I think before we got on, Nikos, you mentioned that you reread this book, at the height of the pandemic here, and it's very fittingly so. I mean, we the living, we are those who are attempting to orchestrate this network of values and to live our lives. It's a very difficult task, and having to try to do that with your hands tied behind your back. Those are the living in the novel. And when you asked earlier about Andrei, is he a sympathetic character? I think that this title encapsulates Andrei as well. I think he is one of the living, but he doesn't know that he's living until too late.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Susanna.
Well, I think that the title came late in the game for her, after the novel was accepted. I do see the emphasis on life, and I think that that's very important. I think if she'd maybe had another go at it, she might have not chosen to have we, as because hey, pretty soon we're going to get to Anthem, and in Anthem, the word we is the monster, and just we is the substitute for I. So it's not actually my favorite title, but I also, it's not as if I've got a better one. I think the passage where Irina talks about the sacred treasure of her life, that there could have maybe a phrase that would point to that, the sacred treasure of her life, and how it's, it's rare and precious, and there's something everyone should know about it, because, well, that is what everyone ought to know something about in the book. And I think you're right in saying that it's not about Soviet Russia only, that it's about, collectivism, the state in other times and other places. And that's one of the things that I think is so interesting about Ayn Rand's writing, is that even, let's take her nonfiction, that she is always writing about, she often writes about current events, and yet the articles don't become dated in the sense of who cares anymore, because there's something universal. And when Ayn Rand's mind goes to work on Soviet Russia or on a current event, then she arrives at principles and understandings and wisdom that are useful to people in other times, in other places, in other circumstances, because everyone needs to know about that sacred treasure, not just in a state that oppresses you. Everyone needs to know that your life, your life matters. And hey, I don't know, it isn't really a spoiler, is it, to say that somehow the idea of your life comes up again in Anthem and in The Fountainhead and in Atlas Shrugged, where it's even an oath, right? So I think that I like the living part of the title. I'm not so sure about the we.
I also like the we, because it indicates also this camaraderie of individuals. So, and I get this in Atlas Shrugged particularly. So what brings Dagny and Hank together is not only the attraction that they have, like, yeah, okay, they would probably also fall in love in a different context, but it's this common struggle that really brings them together. But anyway, that's for another discussion. So,
well, since you mention it, that would be a different novel of people working together existentially to defeat the Soviet state. That'd be a different novel.
Yeah.
Because here, in fact, the conspirator is Sasha, and look what happens to him.
Yeah, but he's a clumsy conspirator. He's not like the conspirators we're gonna see in another novel, which we don't want to spoil. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you very much, both. So, John, if people want to follow your work, so you're doing the Hero series with Andy Bernstein. Do you want to tell us a bit more about what you're doing and where people can look for you?
You can find me on Twitter at Reviving Reason. You can email me at john@theobjectivestandard.com. I publish and edit The Objective Standard, or I'm not the publisher and editor, but I work at The Objective Standard as the associate editor. So you can see my work there, theobjectivestandard.com. I teach courses on how to write powerfully in defense of liberty at Objective Standard Institute, and you can find our site there at objectivestandard.org. And that's about it. So feel free to reach out to me on social media or just email me at john@theobjectivestandard.com.
And Susanna, you have essays in the essays collection, I think, for all Atlas and Fountainhead and With a Living. Am I right?
And Anthem, yeah.
And Anthem, okay, yes.
Yeah.
So again, people, it's the anniversary of the With a Living's publication. It's one of the books that I would say fewer people have read it than those who have read Atlas and the Fountainhead, but there's a lot in it. I would say maybe it's good that we do things for less well-known works, although this is one of the major ones. For example, I'm very interested in doing something about Ideal, which is my favorite. You know how people who like rock bands, they're like, oh, there's this early song that no one knows, but it's my favorite one. Okay, it's not my favorite, but I really like Ideal. So, but I also, hopefully this discussion has given you another reason to jump back in the book if you started at some point and left it, or you've never started it. So thank you very much again to both John and Susanna. And a reminder that our members have access to the Friday reading group on With the Living. I don't know if they have also in retrospect access to previous sessions, but it's still going on. Susanna is joining us every now and then with her expertise. And Razi tells me that indeed they do also have access to previous sessions. And that will be it for today. Thank you very much. And we hope you enjoyed this. We got some value out of this. And all the best. Bye-bye.
And as Kira says, so much is still possible.
So much is still possible.